Hello and welcome to this demonstration for Alice 2.3. This is the third in a series of 5. Today we'll be discussing camera views, how to translate objects in a 3D environment, as well as 3D environment itself. What makes up a 3D environment? How can we navigate a 3D environment? And we'll also be looking at placing dummies in Alice 2.3, and dummies are nothing more than placeholders. And we'll also, if we have time, be looking at some special objects in Alice, such as 3D text and billboards. To start with, I just want to show you in Alice here a little bit more about how 3D space works. If we move up and down, you'll see that the plane, the grass, the ground kind of goes further away from the camera, and as we get closer to the ground, it comes closer and closer to view, and then eventually we go below it, and then it goes away, disappears. So the reason why I wanted to show that, I wanted to really drive home that point of how this grass works, how this grass plane, the ground plane works, is I want to show you this graph here, this 3D graph. This red grid here, it's going like this. I'm kind of tracing it with the mouse here. That red grid there represents the grass plane, the ground plane. And if you'll notice, it's made up of lines going to the right and left, and also on a diagonal here. And that's actually supposed to represent actually coming straight out at you, as if it was coming straight out of your computer. But you'll also notice there's these dark black lines that are also going perpendicular to each other, if it was coming straight at you. But this line here is the x-axis, and it goes from left to right. The z-axis goes from back to forward and backward, and that's to represent, again, the axis here, or this plane here. This plane is going left and right, and also going forward and backward. In fact, if we go down, we could get to the point where almost to the point where it's going almost right at your face and all the way to the back, straight forward and backward, and left and right. And the other arrow here, this one is labeled Y. This is going straight up and down. This is the vertical axis. So the three of these combined make X, Y, Z, make 3D space. Those are the 3 dimensions, X, Y, and Z. And the reason I'm driving this home is because there's a lot of things in Alice that you may not know right away or see right away as being affected by those 3 coordinates, but everything in Alice is actually affected by those 3 coordinates. In fact, if you recall, one of the properties we can have if we put an object in the scene, you might remember this from yesterday, is the point of view. And if we look over, make sure a penguin is selected, we look down at our properties, we'll see that the penguin's detail, the point of view, the position is at 0.0540, 0.81. That position is referring to the X, Y, and Z coordinates. So it's actually referring to this grid right here is invisible in this world, and it's actually positioning this point, this point down here, this point right here with a 3-axis line for the penguin, it's talking about where that position is right now. So we can move this to 0, 0, 0 right over here, and also you'll see that it's oriented at 0, 0, 0. It actually moved and shifted the penguin, so it's now oriented with the world's axis. The Alice itself has a starting position at 0, 0, 0, and the dimensions itself is 0, 0, 0. If I click on the ground, it should be as you can see, it's actually in the exact same spot. So the ground is at 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and so is the penguin. And you'll see that the penguin's axes align right with the ground. I just wanted to touch on that. If that's something you don't care about, then just ignore that. But it can come in handy. And some frustrating things too. Every object has its own set of axes that it starts with. So that this is the penguin's down here, right between its legs, right at the ground level. So if you start to spin it, it spins right where its feet are, because it spins right on that pivot point. Some characters, some objects in Alice, such as the hair, when you pull the hair into the scene, you'll see that the hair actually has its pivot point in the center of its belly. So, and I'm going to actually make him a little transparent so you can see it's a little easier. Hair is selected, opacity down to 0.5, and now you can see that the pivot point is at the center of his body, not at his feet. So when you spin him, he actually spins in the air, whereas the penguin spins at the ground level. So it's very important to know that if you move this hair, let's move him back up to 100% opacity. And that penguin, oh boy, let's just delete the penguin for now. If we move the hair to 0, 0, 0, it's actually moving that pivot point, that central position of the hair to 0, 0, 0 and orienting it to 0, 0, 0. So that's why it's important to know this 3D space and how this is set up. It is possible to get through this and make your own amazing animations and interactive applications and games without knowing it, but it does come in handy when things go awry. You can sort of understand why sometimes that might happen. All right, so I'm going to delete this. One more thing I want to show you, just to touch up on the 3D space, is I'm going to open up this guy right here. I just want to show you how the axis is. Right to left is the x-axis, and it's represented by a red arrow. The z-axis goes forward and backward, and that's represented with a blue arrow. And then the y-axis is this green arrow, and that goes up and down. So that'll come in handy, and you may not have to memorize what each color represents, or which each axis, what letter it represents, but it does come in handy because when you do look at things such as the position, the point of view, the position, or even the orientation, it's talking about the X, the Y, and the Z in alphabetical order, X, Y, Z. So if you know which way the axes are correlated with which letter, then you'll know X, Y, Z. The same thing with orientation. When you spin something in the world, if you spin it this way and that way, you're actually spinning it. Sorry about that. Let me choose this guy here. There we go. If you spin it, you'll see that one of the numbers right here is actually moving. It's actually changing as we spin this. That's the Y axis. That's actually X, Y. It's the middle one, Y. The reason why it's doing it is because we're spinning this on the Y axis. This is actually spinning. The X and Z axis are changing, but the Y is staying the same. So we're actually orienting it or rotating. We're rotating the Y axis, and so that's what this represents. How much of a revolution? And this is almost a little bit more than half of a revolution, almost 180 degrees. So that's important to know which axis is. That's the reason why it might be important to know, so you can keep track of where you're positioning. And also when it comes to coding and programming, it helps to keep track of what X, Y, and Z means. Okay, so moving on, I'm going to start a new world here. And I want to talk about those translation tools, these guys up here. And specifically what these do is move objects in this 3D world. So I'm going to pull in our favorite, the penguin. And right off the bat, you'll see that the cursor is an arrow, and it's this arrow right here. That's what the cursor is. And what you can do with this tool is you can click on objects. You kind of already know what this does. You click on objects, but then when you click and drag, you can move them around on the oops, oh boy, sorry about that. When you move them around, you can move them around on the X and Z plane. So the ground plane. And so you can move around the X-axis and the Z-axis anywhere you want. But you can't move it on the Y-axis. You can't move it up and down. That's what that second tool is. It locks, well, no matter what you do with your mouse, you go back and forth, you go up and down. It's only going to lock or restrain the movement to the Y-axis. So it's just moving the object up and down. The next tool is it's called the turn objects left to right tool. I call it just a rotation tool, but it turns objects left to right, or another way to look at it is that it's restricting it or restricting it to the y-axis. So you're just spinning on the y-axis. And you'll notice, again, if you look at the point of view, as I spin him, the y-axis in the orientation changes. And then if you move on to the next one, there is a forward and backwards tool to turn forward and backwards. When you rotate this, it rotates the object forward and backwards according to the camera. And that's kind of frustrating because there's a lot of times you don't want to rotate it towards the camera. You want to rotate it so that the penguin's taking a bow, for instance. He's not going to take a bow like this. He's going to go forward and backwards. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the penguin, rotate the penguin so he's kind of facing the camera. And now when I go forward and backward, it's a lot better, but it's not perfect. It's not exactly 100% on camera here, or not 100% one direction. And you can actually tell that because there's actually two axes being spinning, the orientation. I'll show you how to take care of that tomorrow, or a little bit today, but some tomorrow. But that's the one thing, that's the one tool up here that I find very frustrating, that it has you rotate on the x-axis for the camera and not the object itself. Okay, I'm going to spin this back, spin this back, spin this back. I'm just using Control-Z to undo. This guy here, this tool is called the Tumble Objects tool, and what you do with this is it actually, and you can kind of tell by the label here, it spins it both on the x-axis according to the camera, and on the y-axis too. And how that works is when you click on them, if you move up, it's going to spin them forward and backward according to the camera. If you spin left or right, or if you move your mouse left or right, it'll spin the penguin left or right too. So again, really frustrating. It's not a very precise tool. It's kind of tough to use. I'm not sure. I've never used it, not on purpose anyway. So I'm not sure if other people have had luck with it or what they might use it for. The tool next to that is a scale tool or the resize tool. When you click on an object, you can, if you move your mouse down, it makes it smaller. If you move it up, it makes it bigger. And then there is this tool over here with two faces on it. That's the copy tool. This tool is kind of dangerous. Excuse me. This tool is kind of dangerous. When you click on that, you have, and you drag, you're actually creating a new object. And that's cool if that's what you want to do. But sometimes, if you're like me, I'm pretty absent-minded. What I'll do is I'll accidentally think that I don't have this selected anymore, and I'll click on it real quick and start to, just because I want to highlight the object, and I'll start changing parameters or changing variables or properties, and I don't realize that I accidentally created a new object and just right now I created another one. I didn't mean to. So be very careful with that tool. Sometimes it's easier to just drag the penguin back out from the bottom, from the folders. So the only way you want to do this is if you animated a penguin and you added a bunch of new properties to it and you wanted to copy the same thing. Even then, you might want to export it as a, oops, I just did it again. You might want to export it as a, or save object, and then save object and import it that way. That way you're not using this copy object tool. Last thing over here with these, and it looks like all the tools have been discussed, but there's one other thing. There's this checkbox right here called Affect Subparts. When you click Affect Subparts, what you can do is actually, let me just get my camera up. You know what? Let me just get him in better position. You can, with Affect Subparts, you can actually select part of the penguin, the actual body parts, and then you can do things. You can use the translation tools on those parts, so that you can actually just pivot the head back and forth, or you can rotate the arms up and down. And this is very important because this is how we, this is how one way you can capture poses. This is how you can create animations by making basically a pose and then capturing it. And then what you can do is through methods, and through creating instructions, you could have Alice tell the object to move from pose to pose to pose, and Alice will automatically fill in those the in-between movements with frames and make it animate. It's pretty cool. It's fun to do. I find it fun to do, and it's a neat feature. And that's how you do it, is by affecting subparts. You can also do this not just with animals. There's vehicles in here. So there's cars. You can make the tires spin. You can make there's drawers. You can make drawers open and close. You can do all sorts of things by affecting subparts and capturing poses. Okay, so we talked about how to move characters in 3D space, and one thing we haven't talked about really that much yet is cameras, and we're going to talk about that right now. First of all, we have these camera controls down here. You can, in order to use them, and you've probably seen me use them a couple times already in this demonstration, if not, especially in the previous demonstrations, but what you do is you click on one of the arrows, and it starts to move in that direction. This first one is moving on the on the y-axis, so it's moving up and down. And then what you can do is you can click, and then if you go up with your mouse, it goes up really fast. Or if you go down, it'll go down really fast. Sometimes too fast. But what you can also do is you can click and go and back it up to the corner or to the center of the arrows, and it'll go really slow. So you can get some more precise positioning of the camera. The left and right arrows here restrict the movement of the camera to the x-axis. So it's just moving back and forth, straight back and forth. And I don't know if you can see that, but sometimes you can highlight too, and you can move in multiple directions at once. It gets a little tougher when you're trying to do precise movements, but again, you can sort of go right into the center, and then it'll restrict it and make it real slow. So that's one way to do it. This next set of arrows here, this one that goes up and down isn't really necessarily up and down, it's forward and backwards. So you're moving on the z-axis, forward and backwards. And then these guys to the left and right are, you rotate the camera on the, you're actually spinning on the y-axis. And again, you can have both, you have more than one arrow selected at a time, so you can move around almost like a snake slithering. And this last set of arrows is rotating around the x-axis. And so it looks like it's not doing very much right now, but what you can do is you can zoom up, or excuse me, you can go up into the air, and then you can rotate down, and you can see, you can have a nice top-down view of the world. You got to be careful with this view. It's not dangerous, but what you can do is it can be confusing, because if you go too much with this roll tool here, this z-axis, which makes it look like it's going to go straight forward, it doesn't. It actually makes it go backwards. It's really, it's kind of, I'm not sure exactly why it makes it go backwards, but it does. So as long as it's, there we go. As long as it's not too rolled forward, it'll still move it forward and backward. So that's the camera tools. Well, one of the things I want to show you about the camera tools too, there's something we can create called dummies, and then they're very, 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 very powerful. And I would throw a million more varies in there if I could, because that's how powerful they are. If you click on the more controls here, there's some stuff here, and we'll talk about it in a second, but I want to get to the dummies because they're kind of important. There's this drop dummy at camera. And what you can do is you can, what dummies are placeholders in 3D space. So basically it's you create a dummy, and what it's creating is an object that is recording the position at XYZ and the orientation at XYZ. So I'm going to click on this. And what happens immediately is it creates a folder over here called Dummy Objects. If you open it up, you can see there's a dummy in there. And also, you'll see if you go to Move Camera to Dummy, if you click on this drop-down menu, you'll see the dummy is there too. Now, I despise the word dummy. I think it really is, it's a horrible choice of word. I understand why they named it dummy. That's just how it is in 3D programs. That's called a dummy object. But for this, I think they should have changed it and called it a marker or a placeholder. I'm actually going to change the name of this folder to camera markers. And I'm going to change the name of this dummy, because right now we're looking at from the top. I'm going to call this top view. So what it did, and I'll show you, well, you know what I'll do is I'll move the camera down, move it back, roll it back up here. So we're looking at the penguin. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create another dummy right here. This is my, this is kind of like the medium shot of the penguin. This is his, he's got a really good role here. He's making some great dialogue. So we're going to create a camera dummy here, a camera marker. Again, it drops it right in the camera marker folder. I'm going to call this the medium shot. Okay, so the reason, and I know I create these when you don't know what to do, but I'll show you right now. You can move camera to a dummy pretty easily. If you click on this None option right here and go to Top View, it'll actually move the camera right back to that original spot that we created the dummy. And then if we want to go back down that medium shot, we can keep doing that. And then the reason why it's powerful is because A, we can set up different shots, different angles for creating animation, but also we can use it utilitarian. We can use it. In fact, this is one of the big reasons why I use it, is so I can create different angles. So I can do things like rotate the penguin. I'll show you. We were having a problem before with here we go. We were having a problem before with our spin tool. We want him to spin this way, but a lot of times if we're not in this, let me drop a camera here. If we're not in that shot, we try to spin him, he goes this way instead. We don't want to go this way. We want to make him bow forward. So if you go to utilitarian camera that's in front, then we can spin him in the right direction. And then we don't have to worry about having to reposition the camera. We've saved the marker. It's almost like putting tape on the ground for a tripod. And so now every time we want to move the camera around, that tape is there, and so we know exactly where the tripod is supposed to go. I'm going to change this dummy name to front view. So I have a front view, a top view, and the top view isn't the right orientation. That's okay. I have a medium shot. Okay, there's another button in here called Drop Dummy at Selected Object. It does the exact same thing as Drop Dummy at Camera, except you're dropping a dummy at selected object. So if you select a penguin, it's going to drop a dummy right where his pivot point is, right here, where his center of his pivot point. So the reason why you want to do that is, again, it's like putting a piece of tape on the ground for an actor on a stage. It's exactly the same thing. So that maybe the penguin's going to move around the scene, and we're going to use these as targets. Okay, move to this dummy. Now move to this dummy. We can also use it for, let's say we're going to have multiple objects move up to a scene. Let's say there's a podium, and at the podium different animals are coming up and giving speeches or whatever. Then we can have one dummy at the podium and one dummy at the end of the stage, and then we can animate each animal coming up individually, and we don't have to fool around, try to remember what the positions are, write anything down. We can just have the dummies there and have them automatically go to each dummy position first. So it's kind of, again, I think they're very powerful. They're easy to use, and they don't show up. If you press the play button, they're invisible. So so I think you can do a lot. You can control a lot of your scene with by using dummies. All right, I'm going to delete that. Okay, I'll do that, and I'll do that. I'll do that. Okay, good. And so that's how you create dummies and how you can move them around. You can also do things like, is this dummy still here? Yeah. Okay. So this is where the penguin was standing. What we can do is we can change this penguin position. Oops. Penguin position. And then what we can do is, since it's not a camera marker, we can right-click in our object tree window. Let me pull this down a little bit more. We can right-click in here and create a new group. And so now we can create our own folders.
So you can organize this a lot easier. So I'm going to take this penguin position and put them into this group. And I'm going to open it up so you can see the penguin position. I'm going to change this to objects, markers. So now I can keep that separated. And that makes a lot more sense. In fact, the file I'm going to give on Friday, actually it might be Monday, but the file I give on Monday, it's going to have, it's a night scene, and there's a cave, and there's fire, and there's a bunch of objects in there, like trees and stuff. And what I did was, the objects that are important I kept out, but then I also have a folder for camera markers, and I have a folder for background objects to help keep it clean, so it's easy to define what exactly you want to animate. So anyway, this is pretty cool that you can make folders up here, make groups. Okay, going back to this tool here, I skipped over this because it really isn't that important. I don't think it is anyway. But there's the aspect ratio. What this means is you can change the way the camera is set up. 4:3 is standard television 4:3. Then there's also this is like widescreen. So as just changes what's cropped, what's being shown, and then you can also do letterbox. So it looks like a movie theater. So that's kind of cool. That's something I would definitely recommend setting up in the beginning of your project and not halfway through. As you can see, I set my camera up so it looked good, and now that I changed it to letterbox, it actually cropped off parts I didn't want cropped off. So make sure you set that at the beginning. The lens angle is weird. If you are familiar with cameras, then you'll know what this does, but it looks like it just zooms in and zooms out, but it doesn't. As you zoom out, it's actually changing the perspective. It's allowing more of the scene to be entered into the view, and that's why it's distorting everything. And the same thing if you go the other way, it's actually reducing what's being seen, so it actually distorts it the opposite direction. I don't recommend changing this. Leave this alone because there's not a definite number to it. It's not like you can change it back and forth, so just leave it. And then there's one more thing I skipped over, and the reason I didn't really skip over, I just saved it for last. It's something I don't recommend using, but it is there. It's called the quad view. Single view is what you're seeing right now. Oh, let me change this back to 4:3. Okay, so single view is what you're looking at right now. If I click at the quad view, it gives you 4 views in your 4 camera views. The first one is, or the top left one is your actual camera. That's what you see in Alice. And when you press play, that's what it's going to be shown. The other views, there's a top view, a right view, and a front view. And I know it sounds like these are exactly what we wanted to create before, but they're harder to use. First of all, you can't zoom in. I mean, you can zoom in on the individual window, but you can't just look at just this frame. If you try to go to single view, it's only showing your original camera view. However, you can zoom in and zoom out, but it gets weird and you can move around using this scroll tool here. But it gets bad because if you zoom in too much or zoom out too much, then sometimes you lose what you're trying to find. You lose your scene. And if you try to move around and you can't get it back, if you try to hit Control Z, you still can't. You can't undo it once you lose your view. And if you save it and come back in, it's still gone. So it's handy it's handy for quick edits, but honestly, I recommend just creating your own camera views using markers. You have a lot more power with this, and it's a lot less. It's a lot safer. Okay, so that's cameras in a nutshell, and positioning and translating objects. One other thing I want to show you before we're done today, I wanted to show some special objects that are in Alice 2.3. Actually, there's not that many. First of all, most objects have the same properties. These ones have different properties. Here's a 3D text tool, and this is right in the folder with. If you go to Home, you go to your local gallery. It's right in that local gallery folder, all the way at the end. It's not in a separate folder by itself. It's just hanging out here at the end. Click on that, and it shows you a text box. So you can put in whatever text you want. I'm going to put in hello. And then you can change the font. I'm going to choose Dana. And then you have bold or italic. Those are the 2 options you have. for styles. I'm going to hit OK. And as you can see, it creates a 3D object. And it's an object like every other. You can click on it, and then you can adjust its properties. You can look at its properties here. You'll see that it has the same properties most objects have: color, opacity. We talked about these yesterday. Skin texture. Right now it's at the none. You can set it to grass. It doesn't really take on the texture of grass, but it does take on the color of it. I think the mapping coordinates are off, but it's still cool that you can put some colors on there, or at least colors that are different than color. You can at least put some texture on there. But the other thing that's different about it, or the thing that is different about it, is that you have these 4 other properties here that other objects don't have. So text, hello. You can change this. So let's say I wanted to just change it to my name, or I can put in Alice. I can also change the font. And I can change the extrusion. What extrusion means is it's basically how deep it is. We're going to basically move this in the z-axis, and let's move this to 2. So it's stretching it out. I'm going to change the color of this so it's a little easier to see. This color here. I'm going to rotate a little bit. But as you can see, the extrusion makes it go a little deeper. Whoa. So that's pretty cool. I'm going to take this back to 2. And then curvature, I would not mess with curvature too much. It's okay to go less, but it looks ugly as you go less, because what it's doing is it's trying to determine how smooth these curves are. The higher the number, the smoother it looks, but the more it's going to bog down your computer. And I accidentally one time put in 256 as the curvature, and it crashed. It crashed to Alice, and it crashed my computer. So I don't recommend doing that. You can go less, but it's going to look ugly. As you just saw right there, it changed it to make it look pretty nasty. Now it's at 1, and it looks very boxy. I just keep it at 2. You can go up to 5, but it really doesn't make that much of a difference. It makes it a little smoother, but really it's going to bog down your system when you start, if you can even animate it. There we go. Speaking of animating, all these properties here are animatable. And I don't know if that's an actual word, but I'm using it. But you are able to animate these properties. So you can have the text change over time. You can have the font change. You can have extrude, make it bigger or smaller, and of course you can have the curvature change. Although I don't recommend it, over time. So that's pretty cool. So it's 3D text. The other thing I wanted to show, and this is sort of a technique that you can use, but I wanted to show it to you and so you knew it existed. In the folder called Special Effects, there are some special effects in here. Some of them aren't so special, such as the cloud, not very special, and the lightning, not very special. However, the fire is pretty special. I want to show this to you. Okay, let me get rid of that dummy. Nope. Okay, well, that's good. What we're going to do is, okay, so what I want to do is just play this, and you'll see that it's animated. I mean, what is this? This is actually a bunch of images that are, and this is traditional animation. This is a bunch of images that are played quickly, so it looks like there's motion. And what this is, it actually is, it's a square. There's a square in the shapes folder. There's a square object. Here it is. It's a square object, and it takes the skin texture of the animation. Okay, and that's basically all it is. But there's more to it. It's actually programmed so that the texture changes. In fact, if you look at the fire animation, you look at the properties, it's just like it. Again, it's just basically a square. The difference is they've imported a bunch of textures: texture 1, texture 2, texture 3. So this is fire animation.texture 1, fire animation.texture 2, and so forth. And when you go up to the skin texture, you'll see that it's set to texture 1, so fire animation texture 1. If you change it to texture 2, the image changes here, so forth and so forth. It's changing. But this doesn't actually animate it. None of this is actually animating it. What's animating it is there's a combination. Number one, there's a method, flame flicker, and there's also a variable that they created for this fire, and they named it horribly. It's supposed to use names that make sense or are spelled out. They abbreviated it and called text move. I believe it's supposed to represent texture move, but you should really spell this all out, texture move. Anyway, so there's this text move list, and it's each item in the list is equal to one of the textures, and so now there's a variable that points to each texture, and then there's a method, and we're going to talk about methods on Friday, but this is kind of a little preview of how this object works. How this method works is we're going to and let's start down here. Fire animation is going to set the we're going to set the skin texture using we use the properties skin texture. We set the skin texture to item, which is the item from this variable right here, for duration of 0.05 seconds abruptly. We're going to do that for each item in this text move. For each item, we're going to display it for 0.05 seconds, and then we're going to move on to the next one, and then we're going to do that over and over again until the end of time, or until the program stops playing. So basically, what it's saying is play each texture 0.05 seconds over and over and over again, and loop it. Pretty cool stuff. I wanted to show that to you so you could kind of, again, get a preview of how methods work and how methods can do things that you might not think of, such as changing textures to make traditional animation, not just 3D animation. So that's what I want to show today. There's other, inside what do you call it? Into the shapes folder, there's, not shapes, special effects folder, there's also smoke. You might want to check that out. That also has an animation. But it's not the same as fire. It's different. It's used a little differently. I would check that out and experiment with that. Also, you can do something called File, Make Billboard, and what you can do is you can basically bring an image in. However, you can do the same thing with a square by importing a texture, and basically that's all this is taking a square and adding a texture to it.